Welcome, welcome, dear friends. Thank you so much for joining us today. In the name of the divine, out of whose womb of compassion and mercy, all things emerge. Thank you so much for joining us. So we heard Pearls of Islam singing Labaik, which I felt was very appropriate for today's book and theme. So before we get there, I would just like to begin with our intention. So thank you for joining us for this Ray of God session. Ray seeks to share feminine spiritual wisdom to help realize God in all ways and to align with justice, truth, and beauty. The energetic state of the feminine is our guiding principle and holds our intention. And we believe that all genders hold the feminine and masculine within themselves. And while we are women-led and women-centered, we welcome and encourage all genders to join us to help create safer, more inclusive spaces. So today I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Auntie Dr. Amina Wadud to share on her latest book, Once in a Lifetime. And I'm just going to read the blurb from the back. In a world of contested images and ideas about Islam, this book captures the passion of a journey into and through Islam by an African-American feminist. Wadud covers the fundamental 5 pillars from a progressive perspective, culminating in the performance pilgrimage every Muslim must make once in a lifetime, the Hajj. Drawn from a series of personal blog posts, Amina's account of her journey to Makkah is unlike any other. Funny, serious, passionate, and searingly honest. At every corner, she challenges entrenched patriarchal and exclusivist views that have dominated Islamic thought for 14 centuries. You would expect no less from the Lady Imam. Welcome, Auntie. It's delightful to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I just, as I was saying to Auntie before we began, and I've said last month as well, this is just an excuse for me to talk to the women that I love. And I love the fact that, we have more of us joining to have this conversation. And I said, I, again, highlighted far too much for a conversation, especially for under an hour conversation. So I'm going to jump into, and again, this conversation is, even if you haven't read the book, you'll understand, you'll follow along, and hopefully you will get a copy afterwards and share your thoughts with us as well. So I want to begin with, so there are basically 6 chapters. And of course, the largest chapter is the final chapter, which is the actual meeting the king, so going to Hajj. And I love the headings that you've given each of these pieces as well. And I guess, first of all, I'd like to just ask you how you came to do this, because we know that there was a series of blog posts, but the fact that you pulled them together to create a book and to share in this kind of this journey, like I had said to some friends that it feels like we're with you. Like I felt like I was with you. It was so personal and intimate. And I feel like I've actually experienced all of these, journeys with you, the different pillars of Islam, but especially the journey to Hajj. Like I haven't been, and I don't know, inshallah, one day, God willing, I may, but I've definitely had a really beautiful taste of this. So how did this journey come about, and how did you pull it all together?
A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. I begin, as I always begin, in the name of Allah, whose grace I seek in this and all other matters. I ask Allah's forgiveness for any errors that I may make through the frailty of being human. Yeah, everything has a story for me. And the story of this was the capacity to make the Hajj through inheritance I got from my sister, who died suddenly at the age of 44. And I was excited about it and talked with all my friends, and many of them said, oh, you're not going to be able to manage it because there are so many gender restrictions, and And I thought to myself, can I just one time go someplace and just, do my devotionals? Um, so this idea popped in my head as I was preparing to just kind of like do a daily blog, starting in Ramadan, the year that I made Hajj, and going for about 100 days. And I announced this somewhere out there on social media that I was going to do this. And Religion Dispatch is an online, religious dispatch, offered to let me post it on their site. So that was an even greater motivation to keep it up, because it's like, oh, I'm responsible now to others. And so I started writing the blogs. And I talked about whatever would come to my heart on, the day that, I would get up each morning. While I was writing it, a publisher reached out to me, California publisher, I don't know, maybe University of California of the Mini Press, and asked me if I would develop it into a book. And I'm like, oh my God, I cannot think about that now. I'm still actually trying to get ready for Hajj. So I did. I performed the Hajj. I kept writing the blogs, wrote while I was there on my iPad. And then when I got back, I contacted them and they said, could you give me a proposal? And I thought, oh my God, now I've got these 100 blogs. What do I propose? And I realized that all of the books that introduce the 5 pillars that I've ever seen are very conservative, and they make a lot of assumptions, and they reiterate a lot of patriarchy. And I thought, well, you know what? I think the one thing that is repeated most throughout this is my perspective on, the 5 pillars of Islam, and that, that was a way to put it together. So I came up very quickly, actually, with the proposal. Then they asked me to send a chapter, and there I am with 100 entries, about 1,000 to 1,500 words each, and I was completely stymied. Like, this is like nothing that I cannot organize all this material, especially if it's just on the computer. I'd have to print it all out, and so I got stymied. And then the Kantara Press people contacted me and asked, if I had something, that I could publish with them. And I said, well, yeah, I have this proposal, and, it goes with this. And I actually sent them all the materials, and mercifully, they helped my scattered brain by organizing it somewhat. And then it became more manageable. And I was able to go in and to look at places where I hadn't written enough in order to make it be about the 5 pillars, fill in the gaps in order to make it be also an introduction to the 5 pillars. And yeah, so, it's a much easier read than a lot of things that I write intentionally, because the discipline of the blog causes me to be not so wordy. As you can see, even from my answer to the question, I'm very wordy. And at the same time, I just had a high level of motivation. After the blog and after doing the Hajj, which was motivation for the blogs, I had a higher level of motivation to kind of provide a different way to look at the 5 pillars. I mean, to include things like the Lady Imam, for example, which is in none of the introductory books. So, I just thought we really need to have an accessible discussion of the 5 pillars, but from a progressive perspective. So I'm happy about that.
Oh, thank you so much. And I absolutely agree. The very few books that I've read for research purposes about the pillars, I don't think I ever actually managed to get through all of them, because it just became so dry. And I think that I probably stopped really reading that kind of material quite a long time ago. So when I read your book, I learned so much. I was like, oh, I didn't know that's why they do this. And I say this for those of you who haven't read the book, it's so accessible that you don't realize that it has all the information, like all the necessities. It is a guidebook. And you know, Auntie, you say quite a few times that there needs to be, you know, something that is accessible, an online portal to help you when you're deciding to do something like, you know, Umrah or Hajj. And I was just like, well, this is it now. This is it. And it's also like a really personal way of going through it as well. I wanted to read something from the first chapter, I Bear Witness. And again, I'm limiting myself on the number of things that I will quote because I can't read all of them. But this one also particularly stuck out to me. So you're talking about remaining faithful, and this kind of, you know, this siege mentality that a lot of Muslims have. And I just love the way that you framed it. I don't have a siege mentality. On the contrary, I have confidence that Islam will continue to thrive even through torrential times. It has lived through nearly a millennium and a half with major issues of preservation coming and going to the periphery. Meanwhile, and more importantly, it has adapted to include a greater diversity of perspectives. Sure, we must address anti-Muslim sentiment or Islamophobia, but we do this by aligning with the order of the universe that confirms Islam as a way of life. I remain faithful to that way of life. It is that orderly universe that makes me Muslim. Meanwhile, it increases the sense of love and serenity I receive when practicing Buddhism and Christianity. Today, I identify as an eclectic Muslim. I just love the way that you bring that together, and I love this term eclectic Muslim. Like I've called myself different variations, so that this is a good one to remember as well. And so, you know, you've traveled, in some perspectives, one could say like a very traditional Muslim kind of, you know, trajectory. Like you fulfill. Nobody could question. Well, people do. Let me take that back. People do, but you're going through all these pillars of Islam, and you're fulfilling them in the most beautiful ways and accessible ways. And you are this eclectic Muslim, and you touch upon, you know, some points in your journey, the rubs that you have with others, and yet you manage to maintain this compassionate, graceful way of interacting with them. And I guess, you know, for so many of us and those who are here today, these are rubs that we have also as we're navigating the world. And I just, you know, wondered if you could give some your experience and through that, you know, guidance for the rest of us, and how we can maintain this, you know, primordial turning to the divine in all our encounters, and be happy as being eclectic Muslims.
You know, it's a challenge. I get rubbed. But, you know, as I was saying to you before we went on, my sheikh is constantly reminding me, you know, about gratitude. So I have to intentionally remind myself, you know, when certain things happen, and I aspire to not being rubbed, to be able to just say, this is just somebody who's not happy with their life, and so they want to come into my life and, you know, make misery. Sometimes I have to tell people online, stay in your lane, brother. This is really and truly an aspiration of my own, because I am actually smitten by the beauty of Islam, the opportunity to be a devoted servant of Allah, whom none of us can ever praise to the worth of, you know, her majesty. But we get this personal one-on-one relationship, and we even get, you know, like kind of steps to take, you know, in that path of devotion, you know, the 5 pillars, the daily prayers, the, you know, even the spectrum of prayers, from the personal dua to the formal salah. So I think, you know, we've been bequeathed with just such a wonderful, you know, sort of guidepost. And if we can hold on to it, then our life will be filled with the beauty. But, you know, my grip will slip. Sometimes, you know, I might just let go in frustration even. So, you know, I don't want to make it seem as if it's seamless. But I can say from experience that when you are filled with that resonance, it is the most fulfilling thing. And one of the things that I've experienced working in activist circumstances, for which I also have a very strong motivation, is that often there is a kind of lackluster relationship to the more disciplined or regimented parts of Islamic worship. And I really try to infuse an understanding of that worship as a vehicle for us to nurture our own souls. And so it is, it's something that comes up a lot. I mean, as I practiced, as I posted so much about last year I was Muslim by choice for 50 years. That's 50 adult years, conscious and aware. I didn't come in as a child and then, had to sort of like rethink it as a teenager and then confirm by the time of my Saturn return or something. I came into it and it worked for me, even though I had never had a negative experience. I didn't have a negative experience as a Christian, and my father, was a Methodist minister. I didn't have a negative experience as a Buddhist. And so why I identify as eclectic now is because I was bequeathed something from those experiences that I still maintain now, and I want to claim them. And I also want to claim my ancestors, and I want to be able to, dabble in astrology and, replenish my altar at the new moon each year. And I'm no longer going to apologize for these sort of, they're called in Arabic, tahsiniyat, these ways in which I beautify my identity as a Muslim. I'm not going to trade those off because somebody can only see, the God in the box kind of notion, that is Islam. I'm going to celebrate the fact that I have more Irish blood than any of the combination of the multiple DNA that I have. I'm 65% African. It's just that it happens to be there's more in the Irish blood than anything else. And I thought to myself, oh, that's why I like Celtic music. So I have a Celtic cross on my altar. I'm going to claim everything that gave me this possibility of this experience one-on-one with Allah, and I'm no longer going to apologize for that. There is something about, when you get rubbed, that you start to sort of steer towards an even more narrow expression of your Islam as sort of a verification. And I just want to flow in, sort of the divine ray, because it's available for all of us. So why would we need to worry if, you remember, in my case, I remember that my father, as a Methodist minister, bequeathed to me the God of love. I chose the name Wadud because I've always known only the God of love. So now I am going back and purposefully and politically claiming these other parts of myself. And then, with this book, I took the privilege of being able to express this love in a language that is not so, erudite and academically, rigorous, because that's also a part of my, experience and expression of Islam. I'm not just an academic. I am an academic. I do love that language. Let me not pretend. It's just that this was such a nice opportunity for me to simply flow from the heart with regard to things that, in fact, are meaningful to me. So in a way, it's, I think having the challenge continually is a reminder for me to continually also polish the mirror of my heart, so the divine, can shine its countenance upon me.
Oh, thank you so much. I know that, your words give so much hope to so many of us that, kind of perhaps trying to walk this path of compassionate activism, and yet can so quickly be lose our energy, and it's like kind of keeping hold of that rope of God, and knowing that you are surrounded by this love and grace, and this God of love that you talk about is for so many people, unfortunately, a new concept. Even if they may have grown up in an Islamic upbringing with family or community, there are so many variations. And then coming to it, I think for me, I can speak, coming to it as an adult, it's just completely new. It's like, oh, I was swimming in this all along, but why did nobody tell me? Why did nobody say that this is how it's meant to be? So yeah, thank you so much. And I'm still stuck at the beginning, because the way that you talk about Tawheed, I've never seen anybody else speak about it in this way. I find kind of sometimes it can get too dry and intellectual. And I just want to say, I really, so appreciate the way that you've brought Tawheed into a living, breathing concept that I can almost feel kind of circling through all the atoms of the universe and within myself. And sometimes when I kind of start to get a little bit too lost, it's just like, okay, it's fine. It's all, and we'll talk later about the Mandelbrot as well, right? This is all part of the Tawheed. I also want to say we've got some amazing people joining us today. If you have any questions, please do pop into chat or raise your hand at any point. We'd love to get your observations or reflections if you've read the book. If you haven't, obviously, if you know Auntie Amina's work, please do join us. I also wanted to obviously touch upon the Lady Imam, because we have that very early on in the book as well. And you talk about the in South Africa, I'm sure everybody here knows about that history, but this part that you have on page 38, you talk about to have been part of this major historical paradigm shift in Muslim sacred performances and understanding is possible only when the focus is more on content. In other words, Muslim women speak. When their speech is made central to Islamic faith ritual, other matters can shift for greater equality and dignity. And here we are, right? Muslim women speaking, and here this is, Muslim women speaking on behalf of, and through the experience of so many of us. And there is so much now that's being done. I know that you're also part of Musawa, which is doing a lot of work in terms of justice and equality, and obviously women-centered and women-led there too. I wonder if you could speak to how, when you wrote these blog posts, what the world was like then and the way that the world is now as your book has now come out, and how you hopefully see some positive change in what's going on.
Wow, there's so much there. So I made Hajj in 2012. So a decade passed before the book was published. I was already retired in 2012 and trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grow up. And the merit of leaving a well-paid job with all kinds of benefits and all that because of my feeling that academia was not going to be the trajectory that was going to lead me to the path to the doorway home, which has been proven to be a good estimation. I then had more time to, I'm a workaholic by nature. I had more time to work at what I love. I didn't always get paid for my work even, but I didn't love getting paid. I loved certain work. And that work was to align my mind, body, and soul with that notion of Tawheed. Now, the thing is that the Tawheedic paradigm came together in the, maybe I want to say 3-5 years before I made Hajj, and has only broadened. And as you said, like it's it's in everything, but you almost have to actually experience it in everything to verify that. Otherwise, it does remain just a dry kind of, academic thing. And when I understood that it's bigger than us, or as I say, on my Twitter handle, either all of us make it or none of us make it, that we are all one, I then endeavored to put more of my workaholism towards the ways in which I feel like I could be a greater part of that greater oneness, or to be a part of the greater oneness, rather than, you have to do the paycheck or, whatever. And the Musawa movement was launched in 2009. And it was then that I came out as a feminist. Before that time, I eschewed the word feminist. And whenever we do our workshops, we just had one a couple months back in the Horn of Africa, there's this marvelous thing about having, this paradigm, this sort of unifying paradigm, and presenting it to people who also had not had the experience of thinking about Islam in this way. And along with my, colleagues, in this collective that we sort of travel around and do these workshops, making contributions, with regard to other disciplines about Islam, Islamic law, and human rights struggles and gender. There is this amazing thing to see the transformation on the faces of the participants, where they also feel even greater empowerment to do the work that they were already doing. But after the workshop, as intense as they get, they have a sense of the justification for doing it, not just being sort of their stubborn resistance to inequality, which is an amazing motivation. But they can augment that by saying, this is really what Islam potentially can be. I don't like to say things like true Islam or the real Islam, which people say, because sometimes people say it and I'm totally in disagreement with them. So obviously I don't want to partake in that kind of exclusivist language. But the thing is that when people have been in the trenches doing this justice work and they've been holding on to whatever rope that they could get, when we come back and we reinterrogate Islam from a gender perspective, the rope starts to lose its fray. It becomes more solid. And I love that. I never could get that in the classroom because obviously it's a secular university and I'm just teaching. I'm just talking about this phenomena, But when I'm teaching the activists, despite the fact that they're so intense that they're like bodily exhausting, when I'm teaching it, there are people who have been looking for a way to stand up against these narrow interpretations of Islam. And they've been looking for ways to justify their own embodiment as Muslims doing this kind of work, but being denied sometimes even their own identity as Muslims because, that feminism, that's just something belongs to the West, or that's just something belongs to white women or something like that. So they get pushed back once again, by people with the narrow version of Islam. And we come and we just say, let's just broaden those horizons a little bit. Let's look at the construction of this and this and this. And all of a sudden, gives them, a handle, what we say in the old school, they feel empowered. So the aligning of, the sort of vision and experience that I've had of Islam from a more Sufic point of view with the activism, it's kind of a niche for me. It's a place where I like to be. I'd like to do it even in even more intimate kinds of settings, because this is a big to-do. We have 20, 30 participants and there's so many people who are working. But it's just kind of, an offering, a way to give an Islam that says no to child marriage or no to FGM. It's just like, no to domestic violence, and to give it through the pathway of Islam, through Islamic sources with this sort of, radical, inclusive reading. To me, that's what I've been born for. It's just like my path was coming all along to get to this place. And, being a university professor and retiring as full professor, that was just tangential. That was just like, a way to pay bills, because I am immersed in this perspective, that Allah has a purpose for each and every one of us. And finding that purpose means that you live in the beauty of that fulfillment. You live in alignment with the order of the entire universe. And there is something about being able to sort of check off all the boxes. Is it meaningful? Is it productive? Does it help others? Does it at the same time challenge and encourage your own soul? Wow, that's just amazing. So in some ways, the activism shaped my capacity to live more fully within this awesome perspective of the universe. Even more sometimes than in Sufi circles, when they tend to be sort of non-socially engaged. It's like, oh, it's just so lovely. I had a lovely weekend, and lots of zikr, and my soul feels so comforted and everything. And now I have to roll up my sleeves and get some more work done, because we are the masculine and the feminine. We are the Jalal and the Jamal. And part of my Jalal makeup is to contribute towards the building of the good as a lived reality. It may start with, and it may kind of linger along in a utopic idea or ideal, which I'm also not going to eschew those. But the thing is, can you make it work? And so that kind of, helps me as a workaholic feel like I am living meaningfully. And then that kind of feeds back to really the sort of vision, the way that I think about things, even the way that the Tawhidic paradigm unfolded for me, So yeah, it's kind of nice to see the unity in the things that you do. But again, it's not perfect. There is some work, there's lots of slip-ups, but in some ways, I think the reward it's just so much greater for me now than when the only question at the end of the day was, is this going to be on the exam? These people are being examined in life, so they're like, oh yeah, I need this in this court, and I need this, in front of, this minister or this department, within the government or something. So yeah, it's, trying to bring it all together, trying to live in, the unity of my own being, and then trying to exercise from that unity towards my relationship to everything in the universe, and especially right here on this planet Earth.
Thank you so much. And I feel like what you just said is summed up in your definition of taqwa. So I'm moving ahead to the Queen comes for a visit, because we are less than a month or just about a month away from the Queen visiting Ramadan. And you say, the Quran tells us one purpose of the fast is taqwa, which is an inward moral compass that manifests in outward ethical behavior. And I feel like what you've just described about having this kind of like, this Sufi kind of intensive nourishment of the zikr and everything's beautiful, but then the outward ethical behavior, like they go hand in hand, and to really be able to do the work, you need that sustenance, but then you also have to then apply it in the world around us. So, and I just love that. I love this definition of taqwa. I do feel like the Muslim Ummah is kind of realizing that that is the point of fasting. Like growing up, it was all about, you know, the really reductive kind of reasons for like, oh, it's about, you know, feeling for others, you know, having empathy for others, and you know, like one day you might not have food, so you're practicing for that. Like it just really didn't quite make sense. And then, you know, kind of as a teenager and then as an adult, realizing, oh, actually, that's not what it says in the Quran. In the Quran, it says that it's God consciousness. This is taqwa. It's not fear of God, but awe of God. And awe also has love and veneration. And then taking, you know, these practices again to support us, to energize us to then do the outward ethical actions as well. So I love that part. Friends, please do you know, jump in at any point, raise your hand, put something in chat. I want to raise this. Oh, sorry, Shazri. Shazri, please do go ahead.
I just wanted to thank you, Amna, because your book, Quran and Woman, and that just, you know, it was a lifeline. I was struggling with all these gender issues, and then there was that book. And I wanted to tell you that I work as a development consultant, so I did a lot of gender training. And then at one point, I included a whole session on gender and Islam, which was based on some of the key findings of your book. And that must have been rolled out over the years to anywhere between 3,000 to 5,000 people. So I just wanted you to know that that's how far it went, and I translated it into Urdu, our language, as well. So it went across a whole range of places and classes and people. So I just wanted to thank you. We have been in touch once.
I'm so honored by that gift. Thank you.
Thank you.
I didn't mean to say to break you off. You're saying we were in touch?
I was just saying we were in touch once, very randomly on Twitter, when you were wanting to visit Hazrat Azad Rasool in Delhi. You remember? And I responded, and we arranged for you to go there.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. I love learning. You know, I mean, that book also, Quran and Woman, is 30 years old last year. It was a marker year for me. Yeah. And the thing that I think is funny is because I was in such a wasteland when I was writing that book, you know? I mean, I did not perceive an audience. In fact, it was my dissertation that was edited, you know, for that little thin book. I mean, it was edited, the dissertation was slimmed down and edited in order to come out with that, you know, slim book. So I've been working on these ideas, but I didn't yet have a community. And now I can look back on 30 years and, you know, have someone like you share with me, you know, the gift of your experiences with it that you shared with others. And that just sort of encourages us all to kind of continue with the struggle, you know, believe in the good. You know, it's like the thing about taqwa is sort of embodied ethics. And, you know, even for me, I try to explain my position as the Lady Imam as a kind of embodied ethics, because my personal choice is this sort of solitary devotional practice. But I am a part of a community, and because I can visualize, you know, sort of a gender non-binary reality, so that there is no one who's better because of their gender than another, because I could visualize that, I was content. You know, I could just about pray anywhere, because everywhere I was praying before Allah. And yet when invited to break this gender gridlock, you know, I had to say, you know, why would you even do that? And I realized you would do it because sometimes you have to do ethics with your body. You have to put your body where it is that you say you are. I know a lot of women would say to me, oh, I agree with it, but I would never do it. Well, unfortunately, I don't understand how that works. You know, like in some ways, when we try to deconstruct the hierarchy of the patriarchal hegemonic version of Islam, where someone has to be an authority and someone has to, be greater than or lead even, because I don't think of the Imam as a leader. I just think of them as a functionary. That when we really want to do that, then we need to do that at every level, that we are in fact, physically capable of doing. To try to, move away from the idea that the only ones who can do this are these, sort of, so-called leaders, and to try to understand that every single person only prays for themselves towards their Lord. And therefore, it doesn't matter what line you're on. And then it occurred to me, oh, if it doesn't matter what line I'm on, then I could be in that first line. I could be at that position of the Imam. That's when I accepted the challenge. I'm not saying it was easy because, you still feel nervous. It's still unusual. You still feel the burden, the responsibility. But eventually I did come to see it as a leveling of the playing field, so that these 5 pillars, which are equally the responsibility of each Muslim. Now, again, I want to preface, because I said something about, as your body is able, if you are a person who cannot stand because of different levels of capacity, in your legs, or, like I'm getting older and my legs are already talking, you just have to understand that I don't mean it as only in the physical form of the able-bodied either. So the participation is something where you do something. You don't just believe something, and that you don't just feel something. You do something. And so, embodied ethics, oh, wow, what the most fantastic place to challenge it would be in the level of worship, to challenge all of that entrenched patriarchy. We are raised with it, we operate successfully within it, we perform through it, and all of a sudden to say, you know what, it's really not about gender. It is about each of us being gifted with the capacity, the khilafah, the ability to represent Allah on the earth. Each of us, and therefore any of us, can perform in any of those roles, no matter the ways in which they've been pushed back by, sort of hegemonic thinking, to begin to embody that and then to own it, like to really feel like, it took me until, 5 years ago to refer to myself as a Lady Imam. I'm like, yeah, I know I did that. Let's not always talk about that because, there's so much controversy and there's so much headspace. You're trying to, be better than other people or something like that. So I kind of like, and then I realized, I don't understand why you're not just claiming it and naming it, So, it's something, because for me, thinking about Islamic worship, the 5 pillars, but thinking about them as a gift to us, not as a form of punishment, not as a restriction or limitation, is not the way that I was taught these rituals. But I have decided to kind of reclaim them, and then to make it easy for people to also reclaim them. Like one of the things I did on my Patreon page was to actually invite people to talk about, the struggles that they may have had for things like, keeping up the 5 daily prayers, which, by the way, I'm going to raise my hand and say that's a struggle for me. How is it that you can kind of like reinvigorate it? And I sometimes, start people at a very basic level, if you could just like 5 times a day, just sort of stop and take a breath, or take 3 cleansing breaths, and just sort of say to yourself, Allah. Start with that. So I haven't even moved to, standing and bowing and wudu and all that stuff, but just to get people to understand that Allah is wherever you are. And wherever you are is the place where you meet Allah, because Allah is present there. So you don't have to be something else. You don't have to cover your hair. You don't have to, just be present with Allah and to conceive of these devotional practices as instruments for the soul to reach into that, closeness. That's not how I was taught these rituals. And that at the same time was how they began to unfold for me. And I think with this book, I had an opportunity to try to express that, so that people could kind of reclaim, their own agency, therefore the truth of themselves with regard to these rituals, and not some highfalutin goal that you have to reach this in order for it to be. You may not reach that. You may walk out the door and get hit by a truck. Those new TV shows where at the end of the movie, somebody crosses the street and then like the truck goes like that. Oh my God, I'm still shocked. So yeah, I mean, lesson Allah, may that not happen to any of us or anyone. But the thing is that we're not guaranteed anything except for the present. And if we can capture that present as part of a continuum of Allah's rays, Allah's jalal, constantly, being made available, and not with the judgments that, we carry in our head and the shame that we are made to feel because we're not doing it that way. That's not part of what, I'm expressing in this book by saying, the idea of reclaiming these, 5 pillars. What I'm saying is claiming them in accordance to our own realities, So, it's a challenge. I mean, I don't feel like I've perfected it. I just feel like I aspire towards it. And, I think it's close to something that Imam al-Ghazali says, with regard to forgiveness, as long as you're asking Allah for forgiveness, you are forgiven. It's when you forget to ask kind of thing, So I feel like it's an ongoing thing. As long as I continue to, sort of nurture my own soul with regard to this, and in the company of wonderful persons like yourselves, then I can get a little bit of it, and then I will, try again, for more and more each time, because we're never going to complete the capacity, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's like whatever you get, however far you go, you're already going to meet Allah, and guess what? When you go further, you'll meet Allah, there too. So it's like, to look at it as a bounty, not as a punishment, not as a limitation. That is hard. And I think it's worth the effort, So yeah, I kind of wanted to bring that, and I wanted to bring it in a way that was a little bit more accessible. It's very hard for me. I tell people I'm not just hungry, I'm famished. I mean, I just have a thing about language that kind of goes to an extreme. So, it's a little more accessible, I think, than my other works, inshallah.
Well, I think you've beautifully captured what I think is the most compassionate chapter, which is about Ramadan. And it is all about this, challenging with compassion and love, and realizing that Allah wants to make it easy for us, but we create these difficulties, and I just think that, if anybody struggles to read the whole book before Ramadan, just read that chapter. It has so much beauty and grace and encouragement to do the fast in a way that is appropriate for you, and all the mercies that Allah is continually giving to us. It's never ending, and so we can just reach out and get them. We are coming towards the end of our time, but Medina had some wonderful questions, and she said she's cooking, but it's fine. We're all at home doing our thing, so feel free, Medina, if you can unmute yourself to ask your question if it hasn't already been answered.
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Amina. It's an honor to be here chatting with you and hearing you expound so beautifully. MashaAllah, it's like I am close to just crying at how affirming it is, because this feels like it's so intuitively what we feel Islam should be for everybody, and it's just so frustrating. I feel that there's one of the things I wanted to ask you about, I have tons of questions, but I'll try and be brief, was I feel the Muslim circles I move in tends to be much more on the Sufi end of things. And I really agree with your what you said earlier about the sort of social activism. It can, you know, when people engage in Sufism, it can just be a kind of like a therapeutic thing. It's very sort of it's lovely and it's wonderful and it's warm and cozy, and you know, it's great. I don't think we should get rid of that, but then I find it challenging sometimes to bring those social justice aspects. I'm the annoying one that is like kind of, yeah, but what about this? And I feel there's a lot of pushback. You know, every time I've tried to talk about patriarchy, about feminism, people seem to think of the feminism as being the F word. You know, they immediately take a very extreme view of what you think, what they assume you think feminism to be. And yes, as you mentioned as well, there's lots of different kinds of feminisms, and there's problematic aspects of, you know, white feminism and so on. But I wondered, first of all, how you kind of gird yourself against that pushback, and how you continue to. I get the sense that you have such a strong grounding in knowledge that obviously is a great anchor. But how do you deal with that kind of emotionally and just psychologically with the pushback I'm guessing is inevitably
Yeah, I mean, I get it in every which way, like too spiritual for the activists, too active for the spiritualists and that kind of thing, and I just decided that, maybe it's my task in life to sort of like be on the edge, to be on the margin. There's a volume I'm reading right now about Muslims in the margin, written by a woman who was analyzing inclusive Muslim spaces. And I, even when my sheikh, whom I love dearly, and he's been my sheikh for more than 20 years, even when he's giving his regular weekly dars, I'm always listening for, I don't know, is it really that or whatever? So that's the way my mind works. So I can't help it. And I have to at least acknowledge that I have had the privilege of following my bliss with regard to the study of Islam, such that I am equipped with like enough reference points, like just settled in my head at this point, that I can draw from them as a kind of counter expression, to what I'm, experiencing. And as far as the Sufi circles go, I mean, I'm from the US, I'm African American. And when I get invited to be a speaker, in those kinds of settings, I'm going to bring my whole body with me. I'm still going to be Black and female in white supremacy America / now Islamophobia, and I'm a hijabi, or at least sometimes hijabi. So I don't apologize for that, because that was a struggle bequeathed to me by my father, the minister, when at the age of 10, he took me to the March on Washington with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. So I was raised in an idea that aligns God with justice. So I'm not buying that, sitting on the hill contemplating your navel. And so sometimes when Sufis get up to speak and they say, I don't mean to be political. I just thought everything is political. I don't understand why you even need to say that. But what they're trying to say is, I don't want to indulge fully into the politics of the day. It's just that while those politics were going on, I had this profound thought about Allah, so I have to bring it up, kind of, this is how they're doing it. So I think that, you can't fake confidence, let's be honest. And I think if you speak from your heart, you speak from where you're situated, then no matter where you are speaking it, you will be like, this is what it is. So once I was in a retreat for queer Muslims in South Africa, and a young guy got up and he's like, oh, you old people, and you're just talking and you just have all these words, epistemology and hermeneutics and Tawhidic paradigms and all this kind of stuff. I don't know what you're talking about, So I said to him, I definitely understand, where you're located, but also because we are still a minority and each of us have to bring whatever it is we have to bring. I am an academic. I am bringing that to this struggle. And that's what I have to give. So I'm going to give from what I have to give. It's not going to be for everybody in exactly the way that I'm putting it out there, but I can only give it to you sincerely from where I am. So I have come to accept that I will be the oddball out in certain situations, and I don't mind anymore. You know, I mean, I'm not just trying to fit in. I'm trying to form community. And this really I learned through the journey as a woman, you know, the Lady Imam. I'm trying to deconstruct the hegemonic kind of authority, like there has to be just one person, and this person has to know everything, and they, you know, have to have a beard, and they, you know, whatever. Instead, I'm trying to say we are each of us imams. And if I truly believe that, that means that I'm going to have to do that in collaboration with, you know, people who are not able to stand for the prayer, or, you know, people who don't know Arabic. I've seen people who recite all of the prayer in just English, you know. So there, you really have to accept people from where they come from, because you want them to accept you from where you come from. So that teaches me that the best thing for me to do in order to arrive at authenticity is to try again and again and again to come from where I really am. And, you know, if this is how Allah made me, my children's book, made by God, so I must be special, you know. You just have to start living, as they say, live in your truth, you know. And then when you do, when you have to speak from that truth, you find it's easier, because you're not speaking against someone, you're speaking in favor of others. I'm only talking about social justice when people are being complacent. You know, they have all this resources to go on a nice fancy retreat and a nice quiet place and all that kind of stuff. Doesn't everybody have that resource, you know? So if you don't understand your privilege to be able to have this lovely experience, then that means that all of these other people who cannot afford to come, usually when I go, I don't pay, they pay me to come, okay? So I already know firsthand that experience, you know? So I just think that learning to be yourself and accepting that sometimes you sound like, you know, well, there she is being loudmouth, or, you know, well, she's always got to, you know, fine, because you know what? Eventually they'll get it. You know, eventually they'll get it. So, you know, don't apologize for it, is what I think.
Ameen, Ameen, Ameen. We are very grateful that you are speaking out and you are following your bliss and telling us to follow our bliss. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been so wonderful. I've barely touched upon the, you know, many quotes I have, but we are coming to the end of our time. I do want to honor the time that people have taken for this hour. So I just want to say thank you again, Auntie Amna. You are, you know, one of the key reasons why Ray was created the way it was created, to keep our focus on the feminine. Thank you so much for always being with us and holding us in your prayers, as I know you do. And no doubt we will have you back again and again and again, inshallah, for as long as we can keep challenging.
So honored to you all. Thank you very much for having me. And if I don't speak with you before, may your Ramadan be blessed with the lights of Ramadan.